the first time I heard my name over the school intercom. The building had been closed for 12 years. Classes ended here long ago. The halls were empty, the doors were locked, and yet, on a January morning, a familiar voice crackled through the speakers and said, "Attendance will now be taken." That was when I understood something I wish I didn't. The school hadn't stopped working. It had just been waiting for winter. The school sits at the edge of town, just past the last row of houses, where the road narrows and the trees grow closer together. When it was open, kids walked there every morning in clusters, backpacks slung low, breath fogging in the cold. Now it's quiet, the playground rusted, the windows boarded, the parking lot cracked and overtaken by weeds that never quite die. Officially, it closed after a budget cut. That's what the town said. Enrollment dropped, funding disappeared, consolidation happened. The truth was simpler. January started taking things. I didn't think about the school much until I came back. I'd moved away years earlier, like most people do. College, work, a life that didn't circle the same streets every day. When I returned that winter to take care of my mother's house, the town felt smaller than I remembered, and quieter, especially in January. People still worked, stores still opened, but something changed in the way conversations ended abruptly when the subject drifted too close to the past. No one mentioned the school, not until the first announcement. It happened on a Monday morning, just after 7. I was awake early, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, listening to the wind scrape against the house. January cold had settled deep into the walls, the kind that makes even familiar rooms feel unfamiliar. Then I heard it. Not outside, inside my head at first. A faint click, a low hum, and then a voice. "Good morning, students." I froze. The sound wasn't coming from my phone or the radio. It wasn't loud. It was distant, filtered like it was traveling through something old and tired. The voice continued, "Please take your seats. Attendance will now be taken." My coffee cup slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. The voice was unmistakable. Mr. Harris, my 5th grade homeroom teacher. He'd been dead for years. I drove to the school immediately. That was my mistake. The parking lot was empty when I arrived. Snow lay undisturbed across the asphalt, smooth and untouched, as if no one had been there in weeks. The building loomed ahead, brick darkened by age and moisture, windows staring blankly back at me. The front doors were locked, but the lights were on. Not all of them, just a few, long rectangular glows behind classroom windows on the first floor. And from somewhere inside, muffled by walls and distance, I heard the intercom click again. "First period attendance," the voice said calmly. I stood there in the cold, heart pounding, watching the lights flicker softly against the snow. No students entered, no teachers arrived, but the school was awake, and January had just begun. I didn't go inside the school that morning. I stood in the parking lot longer than I should have, staring at the lit windows, listening to the wind scrape across the building like something trying to get in. Every instinct told me to leave, to pretend I hadn't heard anything, to tell myself it was stress, memory, the cold playing tricks on me. That's what people here always said. January messes with your head. The intercom clicked again. A pause followed, longer this time. Then a name. Emily Carter. My stomach tightened. Emily Carter had been in my class. Not close friends, but close enough that I remembered the sound of her laugh, the way she tapped her pencil when she got nervous. Emily Carter had moved away in 8th grade. At least, that's what I thought. I drove home with the radio on loud, the windows cracked despite the cold, trying to drown out the echo of that voice. It didn't help. The words followed me, faint but persistent, like they were still traveling through old wires buried beneath the streets. That afternoon, I asked around, casually at first. At the grocery store, I mentioned hearing noises from the school. The cashier stiffened immediately, her hand pausing over the register. "January?" she asked. "Yes." She shook her head slowly. They shouldn't be doing that yet. "Who's they?" I asked. She didn't answer, just finished ringing me up and wished me a good day with a voice that sounded rehearsed. Later, I found Emily's name in the town records, not the ones online. Those showed nothing unusual. But in the local office where paper files still existed, I found a thin folder tucked between tax documents and outdated zoning maps. Emily Carter. No graduation record, no transfer paperwork, no obituary. Just a single note, handwritten in the margin. Unaccounted for. January. That night, the announcements continued. Not just once. At exactly 7 each morning, the intercom activated. The same faint click, the same calm voice. Names were called in alphabetical order. Some I recognized immediately, some took longer. Every name belonged to someone who had attended the school at some point, and every name was followed by silence. Until Thursday. Michael Rhodes. I knew that name. He lived 3 streets over, worked nights at the distribution center. I'd seen him earlier that week, shoveling his driveway, nodding to me in passing. I heard the response before I realized what it was. "Yes," a voice said, quiet, certain. The intercom clicked off immediately. The next morning, Michael's house was dark. No car in the driveway, no footprints in the snow, no answer at the door. By afternoon, people started talking. Not openly, not clearly, just enough to confirm what I already knew. Michael hadn't gone to work. Michael hadn't answered his phone. Michael wasn't listed anywhere he should have been. By Friday, his name was gone, not just from the attendance list, from everything. I returned to the school at dusk, against my better judgment. The lights were still on, more of them now, long hallways faintly illuminated, as if classes were in session just beyond the doors. I pressed my ear to the brick wall. Inside, I heard movement, chairs scraping lightly against floors, pages turning, the soft murmur of many voices, too low to make out. The intercom clicked one last time that day. "Attendance complete," Mr. Harris's voice said. "Thank you for your cooperation." I staggered back from the building, breath fogging the air. That was when I understood the rule. The school didn't take attendance to see who was present. It took attendance to see who would answer. And January wasn't even halfway over. By the following Monday, the town had accepted what was happening. Not because it made sense, because fighting it had never worked. The school announcements continued every morning at exactly 7. The voice never changed. The cadence stayed calm and familiar, like nothing had ever been wrong. "Good morning, students." The words carried through the cold air, faint but unmistakable, traveling farther than they should have. People heard them in kitchens, in garages, in cars with the windows rolled up. No one called the police. No one contacted the district. No one cut the power. That was the part that unsettled me the most. The electrical grid here is old, fragile. Winter storms knock it out every year, and yet, no matter how hard the snow fell or how sharp the wind cut, the school stayed lit. I asked the obvious question at work. "Why don't we just shut it off?" I said, keeping my voice casual. "Flip the breaker, cut the lines." The room went quiet. A man across from me stared into his coffee like it had betrayed him. "We tried," he said, finally. "When?" "Years ago," another voice added. "The 1st January it started again." "Again?" My skin prickled. "What happened?" I asked. They exchanged looks, the kind that say, "This isn't my story to tell." Finally, a woman spoke. "The announcements didn't stop," she said. "They just changed." She told me about the night the town council voted to shut the power down, how crews were sent out in the snow, how lines were cut, how transformers were drained. The school went dark for less than a minute. Then the intercom came on. Not over the speakers, over the radios, over phones left on kitchen counters, over old baby monitors and old answering machines that hadn't worked in years. "Attendance will continue," the voice said calmly. "And after that," she continued, "the names stopped being just students." My mouth went dry. "What do you mean?" She didn't answer directly. Instead, she asked me a question. "Did you answer when your name was called?" The intercom clicked at home that night, just as I was pouring a glass of water. "David Walker." My name, spoken clearly, correctly. The glass slipped from my hand, shattering against the sink. I stood there, heart hammering, staring at the dark window above the counter. I didn't answer. The silence afterward felt heavier than sound. The next morning, my phone was full of missed calls, not from friends, not from family, from numbers I didn't recognize. Voicemails stacked on top of one another, each one only a few seconds long. Breathing, shuffling, the faint scrape of chairs against tile. At work, my badge didn't scan on the first try. I tried again. Nothing. The security guard frowned. "That's strange," he said. "You're not showing up in the system." I laughed weakly. "Must be a glitch." He didn't laugh back. "Come with me," he said. We went to HR. They pulled up my file, or tried to. My name was there, my photo, my job title, but the start date was wrong. It listed my employment as beginning 12 years ago, the year the school first closed. That afternoon, I found myself standing across the street from the school again. The building felt closer now, heavier, like it was aware of me in a way it hadn't been before. The intercom clicked. "David Walker," Mr. Harris's voice said gently. "Please respond." I felt it then, not cold, pressure, like the moment before you speak in a quiet room and realize everyone is listening. If I answered, I would be counted. If I didn't, something else would change. Behind me, a car slowed, then stopped. The driver leaned out the window, eyes wide. "Don't," he whispered. "Once you answer, they don't let you leave." "Leave where?" I asked. He swallowed. "Anywhere that remembers you." The intercom crackled again, waiting. January wasn't asking anymore. It was taking notes. I learned quickly that not answering didn't mean you were safe. It just meant the school handled you differently. The people who answered disappeared cleanly. Their houses went dark. Their names slipped out of systems like they had never been there to begin with. It was quiet, efficient. The ones who didn't answer lingered. They stayed, but the town began to forget them in pieces. I noticed it with Mrs. Langley first. She lived alone 2 streets over, in a narrow house with a sagging porch and wind chimes that never stopped rattling. She'd been a substitute teacher at the school years ago. Everyone knew her. Everyone waved. One morning her name was called. Margaret Langley. She didn't answer. That afternoon I saw her at the post office. She stood in line for nearly 10 minutes before anyone acknowledged her. When she reached the counter, the clerk frowned at the screen. "I don't have anything for you," the clerk said. Mrs. Langley smiled politely. "That's all right," she replied, voice thin. "I'll come back tomorrow." She came back the next day, and the next. By Friday, people stepped around her in line like she was furniture. Conversations continued through her presence as if she weren't standing there. When she spoke, it took a moment for anyone to realize they'd heard a voice at all. Her house grew colder, not broken heater cold, empty cold, the kind that sinks into walls and stays there. I visited her once, bringing soup I didn't think she needed but wanted to offer anyway. She sat at her kitchen table, wrapped in layers of sweaters, hands trembling. "They keep calling me," she said softly, "every morning." "Why don't you answer?" I asked. She looked at me, eyes sharp for the first time. "Because I'm not a student," she said, "and I won't pretend to be one again." The next day, her name wasn't called. Instead, the intercom announced something new. "Staff attendance," Mr. Harris's voice said calmly. Names followed: teachers, aides, custodians. Some were alive, some weren't. That was when the attacks began. Not dramatic, not sudden, subtle. People who hadn't answered started feeling the pressure. Headaches that bloomed during the announcements, noses bleeding slightly when their names echoed through the air, fingers stiffening, joints locking, vision blurring for seconds at a time. The school was pushing. Mrs. Langley collapsed on her front porch on a Wednesday morning, not frozen, not unconscious, just absent. Her eyes stared forward, unblinking. Her mouth opened and closed as if she were trying to speak, but no sound came out. When the ambulance arrived, the paramedic frowned at his clipboard. "What's her name?" he asked. I answered for him. He hesitated. "That's strange," he said. "She's not in the system." Mrs. Langley died that night. Not from cold, not from injury, from being unaccounted for. The school announced her name one last time the next morning. No response. Then it moved on. That was when I understood the threat wasn't disappearance, it was erasure, and the school was getting closer to me. That afternoon, I found my childhood yearbook in my mother's attic. I hadn't looked at it in years. The pages smelled like dust and old glue. I flipped to my class photo. My face was there, but my name was gone, just a blank space beneath the picture. The intercom clicked in the distance. "Attendance will continue," Mr. Harris's voice said, and I realized the school wasn't trying to take us back inside. It was trying to decide who still belonged. The first physical attack didn't come during attendance. That's what fooled me. I'd started timing the announcements. 7 in the morning, without fail. Names spoken slowly, carefully, like each one mattered. I stayed away from the school during those hours, convinced that distance still meant something. It didn't. The attack came that evening, just after sunset, when the town was settling into its quiet routine. I was in my mother's living room, sorting through old boxes, trying to find anything that explained why January mattered so much to that building. I found report cards, mine, every year from kindergarten through 6th grade, neatly stacked, grades fading slightly with age, teacher comments written in careful cursive. and on every single one, in red ink at the bottom of the page, the same phrase appeared: attendance perfect. The lights flickered. The room went cold. Not drafty, not gradual, instant. My breath fogged as if I'd stepped outside. The walls seemed to pull away from the room, stretching the space just enough to make it feel unfamiliar. Then I heard it, the scrape of a chair across tile, not in the house, in my head. "David Walker," Mr. Harris's voice said softly, close enough to feel. "Please take your seat." My knees buckled. The floor beneath me felt wrong, too smooth, too hard. For a split second, the living room was gone. I was back in the classroom, rows of desks stretched out in front of me, sunlight slanted through tall windows, frozen mid-afternoon. Dust hung motionless in the air. The room was full. Students sat perfectly still, facing forward. Their faces were pale, expressions neutral, eyes fixed on the chalkboard. I recognized them: Emily Carter, Michael Rhodes, Margaret Langley, and dozens more. Every one of them looked cold. I tried to move. I couldn't. A pressure settled on my shoulders, firm but not painful, like hands guiding me downward. "Sit," the voice said. I fought it. The effort burned through my muscles, sharp and disorienting. The pressure tightened, not punishing, just insistent. This was the attack, not violence, correction. I screamed, and the sound broke the image. I collapsed onto the living room floor, gasping, fingers numb, heart racing. The cold lingered longer this time, sinking deep into my bones before slowly retreating. When it was over, the house felt empty, not quiet, vacant. I lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling, understanding something new. The school didn't want me gone, it wanted me present. I went to the school the next morning before attendance. Snow crunched beneath my boots as I crossed the parking lot. The building hummed faintly, alive in a way it shouldn't have been. I pressed my hand against the brick wall. It was warm. Inside, the intercom clicked. "Attendance will now be taken." I didn't wait for my name. I spoke first. "I'm here," I said, voice shaking, "but I'm not sitting." The building reacted. The hum deepened. Lights flickered violently. The air vibrated, pressure building like a held breath. For the first time, the voice hesitated. "Attendance requires compliance," Mr. Harris said. "No," I replied. "It requires acknowledgement." Silence. Then something changed. The index expanded. Names echoed through the cold air that had never belonged to students or staff. Parents, neighbors, people who'd only driven past the school once. Anyone who'd heard the announcements. January had widened the classroom, and the school was no longer teaching children. It was teaching the town what happens when you stop answering. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the pressure on my shoulders again. Not painful, not cruel, just firm enough to remind me where I belonged. In a seat, in a row, counted. By morning, the cold had settled deeper into the town. Snow fell steadily, muting sound, flattening everything into the same dull gray. January had reached the part of itself where days feel interchangeable, where time loses urgency. That was when the truth finally surfaced. Not in a dramatic revelation, not in a confession, in a memory that refused to stay buried. The school hadn't closed because of budget cuts. That was the story we told outsiders. In reality, it had closed after a January incident that never made the news. I found the records in the town archive room, a place few people remembered existed. Old filing cabinets, paper logs, dust thick enough to dull your fingers. The incident report was thin, too thin, 1 page, no signatures. It described a winter morning years ago, colder than usual, when the heating system failed during first period. Students were kept in their classrooms while staff tried to fix it. Attendance had already been taken. Everyone was accounted for. Almost everyone. A substitute teacher had miscounted. 1 student was marked present who hadn't arrived. When the mistake was discovered, it was too late. The boy had been outside the building the entire time, knocking on a side door that wasn't monitored. The cold was severe, wind chill dangerous. No one heard him because everyone inside believed attendance was complete. By the time the door was opened, he was gone. They never found his body. January erased it. After that, the school changed. Teachers became strict about roll call. Names were repeated, absences questioned aggressively. Attendance wasn't just a formality anymore, it was a defense. But something had already settled into the building. The idea that being counted was the same as being safe. When the school finally closed years later, no one thought to turn the intercom off. And January remembered. Winter does something to sound. It carries it farther. It sharpens it, makes voices linger longer than they should. In January, silence stretches thin enough for echoes to slip through. That's when attendance works. That's when names can be pulled back. I returned home with the file tucked under my arm, hands shaking. The intercom activated early that morning, not 7, 6:45. "Attendance will now be taken," the voice said. Not Mr. Harris this time, a child's voice, soft, careful. The first name called was the boy's, the one who had never made it inside. Every light in town flickered. The temperature dropped so fast it felt like impact. People screamed, and for the first time, the school didn't wait for answers. When the child's name echoed through the town, something fundamental shifted. It wasn't fear anymore. It was recognition. People poured out of their houses without being told to. Doors opened all at once. Lights snapped on across the streets like a signal. The cold was sharp enough to hurt, but no one stayed inside. Everyone could hear it now. The intercom wasn't confined to the school. It carried through phone speakers, car radios, old alarm clocks, even the faint hum of power lines. The voice moved through systems built to transmit information, using them the way the school always had, to reach everyone at once. "Attendance will continue," the child's voice said gently. Names followed, not students, not staff, parents, bus drivers, office workers, people who had been in the building once, people who had never set foot inside but had benefited from the mistake. The school wasn't expanding randomly, it was finishing the count. I stood at the edge of the parking lot, file clutched in my hands, the truth heavy enough to feel physical. Snow cut sideways across my face, stinging my eyes. The building loomed ahead, lights blazing now, every window lit. The classroom was full again, not with bodies, with memory. I understood the final rule then. Attendance had never been about presence, it was about responsibility. The school only recognized one way to end the count. Someone had to acknowledge the absence, not quietly, not privately, out loud, in the building, in January. I went inside. The front doors unlocked at my touch, warm against my frozen hands. The air inside was thick, humming with energy, like the building was holding its breath. The hallways stretched longer than they should have, lockers lining the walls like teeth. Footsteps echoed ahead of me, though I was alone. The intercom clicked. "David Walker," the child's voice said softly. "You're late." "I'm here," I replied. My voice shook, but it carried. "But someone else isn't." The humming deepened. I stepped into the old classroom. Desks were arranged in perfect rows. Chalk dust floated in the air, suspended, unmoving. The board at the front of the room was filled with names, some crossed out, some circled, one space left blank. The pressure returned, heavier than before. My knees buckled, but I stayed standing. "You marked attendance complete," I said, forcing the words out, but it wasn't. The cold surged. "That's not how it works," the voice replied, not angry, just firm. "That's exactly how it works," I said. "You counted him inside when he was outside. You closed the door." The room shook. For a moment I saw him, the boy, standing by the side door, knuckles red, breath fogging the glass, waiting. "I see you," I said, voice breaking. "You were here. You mattered. You weren't absent." The pressure eased. The chalkboard creaked. The blank space filled. A name appeared slowly, written in uneven letters. "Attendance complete." The lights dimmed. The voices stopped. I collapsed to the floor, gasping, hands numb, heart pounding hard enough to hurt. Outside, the town went silent. The cold receded, not all at once, but enough. Enough to breathe, enough to stand, enough to survive. I woke up on the classroom floor long after the lights went out. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. The room felt smaller than it had before, the air less dense. The desks were just desks again, old wood, scratched metal. Dust settled where it should have been. The intercom was silent. That silence mattered more than anything else. When I stepped outside, dawn was breaking over the town. Snow lay undisturbed, smooth and pale, like nothing had happened. People were already emerging from their houses, slow and cautious, as if the world might still be fragile. They looked at me differently, not with gratitude, not with fear, with recognition. The town returned to normal in the way places always do after something they refuse to name. Work resumed, stores opened, conversations filled the air again. If anyone noticed that the school's lights never came back on, they didn't mention it. Officially, the building was finally disconnected from the grid. Unofficially, no one went near it. I paid the price in quieter ways. My name came back into systems slowly. Payroll fixed itself. Records corrected. The blank space beneath my yearbook photo reappeared. But some things didn't reset. I can't sit in rows anymore. Restaurants with tightly packed tables make my chest tighten. I avoid theaters, churches, anywhere with numbered seats and a voice that tells people where to go. Sometimes, when a room grows too quiet, I feel that familiar pressure on my shoulders. Not enough to force me down, just enough to remind me the shape of it. The town changed its habits. Attendance became a sensitive word. Schools nearby stopped using intercom roll calls altogether. Teachers checked names quietly, one-on-one. Parents didn't argue. Everyone knew why. I visited the school one last time in late February. The building was dark. power truly gone now, snow piled against the doors, sealing them shut. I stood there for a long time, listening. Nothing answered. As I turned to leave, I noticed something carved in the brick near the side door. It hadn't been there before. A single word, present. No date, no name, just the confirmation. I left town that spring. I told myself it was over. Years passed. Then, one January morning, in a different city, in a different house, I woke up to a familiar sound, a click, a low hum, and a voice, distant but unmistakable, carried through the cold air. Good morning. I didn't wait for the rest. I got out of bed and stood in the doorway, heart pounding, breath fogging the dark. Some lessons don't stay in one building, some records don't close, and January still takes attendance.
I don't live near the school anymore. I don't even live in the same state. That was supposed to matter. Time passed the way it always does after something ends badly. Months blurred into years. New routines replaced old ones. I learned which sounds belonged to the city and which ones didn't deserve my attention. Most days, I almost believed it was finished. Almost. January still feels different. Every year, when the air sharpens and the nights grow longer, I feel it again. Not fear, not panic, awareness, like a room growing quiet behind me. I work in an office now, modern building, clean lines, badge access, digital systems that track everything, attendance software, time clocks, automatic logs that record when someone arrives and when they leave. The first January after I moved, I noticed a pattern. At exactly 7 a.m., the system would pause for a fraction of a second, not crash, not malfunction, just hesitate. Then it would continue as if nothing had happened. No one else noticed. The second January, a coworker's name stayed highlighted on the attendance screen longer than it should have, present but not confirmed. He didn't come in that day, or the next. HR said he transferred, no forwarding address, no goodbye email. By the third January, I stopped asking questions. I started watching instead. Because the truth is, the school didn't follow me. I carried it. Not the building, not the voice, the rule. Attendance isn't about where you are. It's about whether you respond, whether you accept being counted by something that doesn't care what it costs you. Every system needs confirmation. Every structure needs acknowledgement. And January makes people quiet enough to listen. Some nights, when the city falls still under fresh snow, I hear it faintly. Not words, just the suggestion of sound, a readiness, waiting for names, waiting for answers. I don't respond. I stand where I am. I stay upright. I refuse the seat. But I understand now why the town never truly escaped. The school didn't want obedience. It wanted recognition. Someone had to notice the absence. Someone had to say it mattered. And once you do, once you learn how attendance really works, you never stop being part of the count. January isn't a month, it's a reminder that systems remember longer than people, that silence can be mistaken for agreement, that being present doesn't always mean being safe. Somewhere a speaker clicks on, somewhere a list is opened, and somewhere a voice prepares to speak a name. If it's yours, don't answer too quickly, because attendance is never just about being there. It's about what happens after you say yes. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to Death Rehaunt. Some places don't haunt you, they keep records.